Today, I want to talk to you about story and the importance of story and what this does for us, where it comes from, how we can begin to work with it to start creating new stories and move forward. Humans are meaning creating machines. We create meaning about everything, right? Like I have a meaning about this like green moss here, right? I have a meaning about it. I have an experience with it. I have a meaning about it. I have a story about it. And, it was 6 months ago or something like that where I came out and the moss was like green and glowing. But another person might have a story about that moss where they were like allergic to it, right? Or something like that, or had a bad experience, or their brother made them eat it or something, whatever. The point that I'm trying to make here is story is so powerful, and you have a story pretty much about everything. There's a story about the snow, there's a story about the trees, there's a story about your girlfriend, there's a story about your husband. And if you live from this story, you are living from a place that's been predetermined, usually, right, by some set of experiences, and tends not to really shift that much. It can, right? I'm not being, black and white here, but I'm saying these stories that we have about things and about people or about situations, they tend not to shift that much. And that can be a bit dangerous because if we are not allowing ourselves to constantly be upgrading our stories, to be learning more, to be open and expanding to what's possible, then we get stuck. And this is the most common word that I hear when talking to people one-on-one. I am stuck. And what I do as a coach is I go and I look at their story. Where are they stuck? Here's the story of what they have, right? But what's underneath that story, the undercurrent? What are they telling themselves about that thing? What are they telling themselves about themselves, right? You have a story about yourself too. And so when we begin to look at these stories and we begin to see how these stories were generated, we start to understand why we go out into the world, right? Our view determines our actions, right? Which determines our results. So if you want to begin to work with story, you can actually do a couple of things. One of the first things is you can get a pen and piece of paper and you can write your whole, I almost fell. You could write your story on that piece of paper in as much detail as you'd like and include the important things that you really want to put down there. And then come back to it a few days later and read it, right? It'd be pretty interesting having a new set of eyes reading that story and going, wow. This is how I interpret the situation, or this is how I interpret myself, or this is how I interpret my significant other. And you might start to see in this practice that your story that you have written about something or everything might be severely limiting. Where you go, I don't know if I necessarily like that story that I have about my body, or I don't know if I necessarily like that story that I have about my relationship. And here's the offer, okay? It takes some awareness and it takes some practice, but you can then ask yourself the question, what is a new way of looking at this? Essentially, a new story that would really serve me. Okay, what's a new story that would really serve me? If you've been looking at your relationship as like, same old, right? You could go, this story doesn't serve me because our relationship stays stagnant. Our relationship doesn't really move forward. What's a story that could really serve me? And we're not trying to be unrealistic like Cinderella here. It's not about that. It's about going, you know what? It's not about same old. That's the old story. The new story is I'm going to learn about this person every single day. And when you view your relationship in that light, and then you go, okay, what would the actions be in correlation with this new story of I'm going to learn about this person every single day? Well, I'm going to ask questions or I'm going to have curiosity, and then you're going to get different results. So the stories that we have in life generate a specific set of actions for us, which generate a specific set of results. If you don't like the results, you can go back and you can look at the story. And like I said, you could write out your entire story of life, or you could go out and just be like, I want to write the story of what my story about my body has been. What's the narrative? I use narrative/story interchangeably. What's the narrative of it I've been telling myself about myself? And then come back to it, right? You don't want to just sit with it forever. Come back to it and go, I see. Like, I've been telling myself that I'm not good enough, or I've been telling myself that I'm not worth anything, or I believed, and this is the last part of this kind of discussion here, I believed the story that someone else told me, right? Maybe it was grandma, or maybe it was dad, or whatever, right? I believed the story that they told me about me. Stories don't necessarily mean that it's true. Stories are just stories, and there might be some truth in it, but it doesn't mean that you have to function from that place. You can offer yourself a new story. I want to live in the story of, the adventurer. And what would the adventurer do? The adventurer would go out on an adventure and film outside, or whatever it might be, right? Versus, I'm living in the story of a homebody, or I'm living in the story of the perfectionist. There are so many stories out there, and when you can begin to identify your narratives, and it can be like, look at the narrative with your body, look at the narrative with your relationships, look at the narrative with your mental health, look at the narrative with your work, right? Just start there and start going, look at the narrative with your emotions, right? Or even your thoughts, and go, does this story serve me? Does this narrative serve me? And if it doesn't serve you, begin to write out the old narrative and then begin to offer yourself something new. That new narrative is going to serve you, and it's going to take some time and some practice to try on. Guys, this stuff that we're working on here, it's not like, it's just like, oh, I just installed it in myself and like it all is different. No, you gotta try it on. Like, oh, I fell back into my old story of the perfectionist. I'm going to fall into the new story right now, make a choice, a conscious choice of the curious, adventure, or whatever it might be, right? Or the person who says it's okay to make a mistake, who walks with grace, even though I just almost fell there. So look into your narratives, look into your stories, start with one area of life, identify the areas that really don't serve you, and begin to ask yourself, what story could I live in? What story would be really good for me? I promise you this will help a ton.